Good evening, everyone. Welcome to today's symposium on artificial intelligence, ethics, and democracy. I'm very happy to welcome you here all again in the Iranian Wisdom House and for another intellectual event. Today, our main purpose is to honor Professor Mark Coeckelbergh for the translation and publication of 4 of his valuable works in Iran. As you may know, Iran ranks second in scientific output in West Asia, the Middle East, and first among Islamic countries. According to the latest official statistics, about 3.4 million students are currently studying at universities and higher education institutions in Iran. About 90% of these students are studying at graduate level, including master's and doctoral programs. At the same time, artificial intelligence has become a very important and vital academic field in universities. Its effects are also becoming more visible in people's daily lives. While people are excited about the usefulness of artificial intelligence and the convenience it brings to daily life, many are also concerned about whether artificial intelligence will eventually replace human beings or cross ethical boundaries. At this point, I would like to invite you to watch a short video related to this symposium.
Presented by the Iranian Wisdom House in Vienna. Symposium on Artificial Intelligence, Ethics, and Democracy.
In honor of the Persian translation and publication of the books of Professor Mark Coeckelbergh in Iran.
Speakers.
Professor Mark Coeckelbergh, philosopher of technology, professor of media and technology at the Department of Philosophy, University of Vienna.
Professor David J. Gunkel, an American academic and presidential teaching professor of communication studies at Northern Illinois University.
Dr. Amir Khor, senior scientist, AIT Austrian Institute of Technology.
Dr. Rohala Aslami, associate professor of political science, Faculty of Law and Political Science, Firdausi University of Mashhad.
Dr. Reza Gulami, assistant professor at the Institute for Humanities and Cultural Studies. Researcher in political philosophy.
Artificial intelligence and democracy. As decision-making is delegated to algorithms, how can the sovereignty of the people be preserved? In an age of fake news and AI-driven manipulation of public opinion, does the concept of free choice and free will still hold meaning for citizens? How can we prevent artificial intelligence from becoming a tool for the monopoly of major technology corporations or for the totalitarian surveillance of governments? Artificial intelligence and ethics. When artificial intelligence causes harm or a fatal error, who exactly bears the ethical and legal responsibility? How can we ensure that algorithms do not reproduce and intensify past human biases and discrimination? If artificial intelligence one day achieves self-awareness, what ethical responsibilities and obligations will humans have toward it? Artificial intelligence and authorship. As machines generate flawless texts, what becomes of the concept of pure creativity and the spirit of human authorship?
As AI rereads and imitates the works of writers, how can the moral and economic rights of the original creators be protected?
We look forward to welcoming you on July 10th, 2026, from 5 p.m. to 7 p.m. Value, Schadenfeldgasse 3, 1070 Vienna, Austria Iranian Wisdom House, Vienna.
Yeah, and when I invited or send out the invitation for this event today. Many people reacted that it's an unusual topic actually for Iranian Wisdom House. Many people reacted it was the first reaction of many people, but actually it is not, because what many people in Europe don't know is that actually Iran is one of the leading nations that in the field of AI, and actually so important and so valuable, so advanced is the research in AI in Iran, that one of the first tracks, and as some of you know, I just came back from Tehran, and I visited one of the sites that have been attacked by the US and Israel during the Ramadan war in March and April, and one of the first sites they attacked was the IT Research Institute and the AI Research Institute at Sharif University. So the research in the field of AI is apparently also considered a main danger for US and Israel, that they targeted this research center, which was housed next to the Pasteur Institute in Tehran, which has also been targeted. The Pasteur Institute, I think, was in some European media. The targeting of Sharif University and the IT and AI Research Center was less mentioned in European media. But now, enough said from my side. Now I would like to invite Professor Mark Coeckelbergh to come to the stage and deliver his speech. Thank you very much. As you wish, actually, as long as you sit there. Microphone.
Do you hear me? Yes.
20 minutes?
20 minutes.
5 minutes before.
Okay, yes, please, yes. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. First of all, I would like to thank our host who kindly invite me here to speak. It's of course very much an honor for me to take part in this celebration of the publication of the Persian translations of 4 of my books. I'm very happy that there is so much interest in Iran for my books, and that also today that you are here and that we can come together to talk about AI. What I will do in my presentation is talk about AI democracy and the common good, which relates to my book that in English is called Why AI Undermines Democracy and What to Do About It. You know the Persian title. That I think is relevant today in a world where there is more and more authoritarian tendencies and where citizens have less and less to say about our technological future. In my work, I first focused on ethical issues, and these are some of them. I would say today an important one is also the environment and the climate. And of course, we also see that unfortunately AI is used also for purposes of war. And what I did in work is not only to look at some ethical problems, but also to investigate some of the deeper philosophical questions, such as what is the future of writing and thinking today when we have AI that can produce text and that is increasingly used both in academia and outside academia. And David Gunkel, my co-author of Communicative AI, will later say more about that. I was interested in using political philosophy in other books to talk about issues of power, issues of democracy also, because the starting point was that technology is not politically neutral, but that it enables all kind of political problems. And in the work on democracy, the starting point was in this book that there are these risks for democracy, but also more widely the risks for authoritarianism and totalitarianism. And that's a more general problem which we have in many countries in the West and elsewhere. But for example, in Europe now, we just heard that the chat control law has been passed, which means that messages can be read by big companies, perhaps by politicians. So we live in a times where digital technologies make possible the mass surveillance of people and therefore also control of people. So these are important issues to talk about today. I have analyzed these forms of authoritarianism. Today I would like to talk about the impact of AI and democracy and offer some pathways for more democratization, especially putting emphasis on education, culture, and a normative orientation towards the common good. And I think this term common good is something that beyond the language of democracy and rights, that can also bring people together at a global level. So that's good for, I think, good term for intercultural exchange also. So in the book I note first that in the history of the West there is this authoritarian direction already, and even the use of the metaphor of steering the ship of the state, political cybernetics. And today we see the continuation of this tradition where the experts in AI sometimes claim that because they know what AI is, we should leave the governance of AI to them rather than to the people and to politicians. So we have a history there where already in ancient civilizations there is a centralization of power through technology, and which is continued today with AI also. So the question is then, what can we do with AI today? Can we make this more democratic? And here AI is not only the hardware, software, the resources, but it's also the narratives and the meanings that we have in our society and that are reflected in the AI. AI is a kind of mirror of our values, of our concerns also. And that makes it also very interesting to study as a way to do critical work on society. Democracy itself exists in some forms, but it's very much an ideal, and there is a whole discussion in academia about what AI is. The kind of democracy I am interested in is one where there is a mutual learning of perspectives, listening, shared understanding, or a process towards shared understanding, which goes beyond democracy as just a procedure and a kind of method of representation, and it's more about how we should communicate with one another. So it's a more communicative understanding of democracy. And the danger, therefore, for AI and democracy is not just about the manipulation of voters, which we've seen already in the Cambridge Analytica case in 2016, but is also an undermining of some fundamental principles. For example, the subversion of autonomy. Can you still make up your own mind when AI manipulates you, when also with LLMs now it's possible to persuade you by means of language? How are the power asymmetries in society? In what kind of context does AI work? Today we have social media where there is more and more polarization and where there's less listening to each other, undermining of tolerance, fraternity, and so on. So this erodes in the end knowledge in society, trust in society. We don't know anymore what is true, what is not true. We don't know what is real, what is fake, because now it's possible to have all kind of films about someone which are not true, right? And so the danger I see is that more and more we stop sharing a world. Sharing a world is so important already, for example, in the work of Hannah Arendt, for democracy, for real politics. And so once you don't have that, there is a danger, she thought, that there comes a totalitarianism. If AI contributes that, then this trust basis is undermined, then there is no shared reality, and then we have less and less epistemic agency, less and less agency to make up our own mind and to form our beliefs, because there is always this huge influence of AI. So given these problems in one could say political epistemology, we need to think about how can we change this, how can we work on the kind of knowledge that we need, that where there is clarity about truth. How can we avoid that people are talking in knowledge bubbles where they only hear the thoughts, the views of others they agree with. And so one way to do this is to say, like, well, the democracies we have in the West are not democratic enough. They need new institutions to make it stronger. One can also look at digital commons to make sure that the data are not just going to big tech companies, but that we also have some control over it, and that we say, like, well, if information and data are so important in our society today, shouldn't we have public control over this data? So it's not just about privacy, individual privacy, but it's about common goods, just like we have air, water, for example. Then one can also use AI to strengthen democracy, for example, to help to come to a consensus. There is a so-called Habermas machine, for example. But here it's important to resist attempts at using all this technology to solve our problems. So, of course, technology can help, but we have to ask the questions, where do we want to go with this technology? What do we want to do as a society? And therefore, one has to go beyond this techno-solutionism and also look at society as a whole. What knowledge do we create? How do we want to create it? And how can we have a cultural change next to preservation that goes towards a more common understanding of both knowledge and technology. And in the West, for this kind of direction, one can look at Renaissance, humanism, republicanism, to create shared knowledge and experience. In the humanist times, for example, the new technology of books enabled to share knowledge and create a shared reality. And I think we need that again today with digital technologies. So one can talk about digital humanism, for example. Then I think that the current systems of liberalism in the West are too thin, normatively speaking. The idea is that you can just deliberate and come to a consensus without sharing some main values, and this is not working. So one needs some normative orientation towards a shared value system to some extent, and I think that the term common good can help there. So I think if we are serious about participation, deliberation and so on, one needs to also work towards common good and not only just adding up individual preferences. And digital technologies could support this, could support promoting the common good rather than private, could promote the building of a common world. And it doesn't mean that that we know always immediately what a common good is, so we do no longer live in traditional societies, but we can use the resources from the past and we can together see what could be the common good for the future. So it's future oriented rather than protective, and it's communicative. It's communicative in a sense of making community rather than only relying on what is there. So given that we have this, for example, in Vienna, in this city, one has always a pluralist environment, and the idea is to make the common good. So it's not given, it is a challenge, but one can try to make it something I think we also try to do with this kind of conversations. And I think if we fail to make this common good, that there will be more authoritarianism and totalitarianism, because then we give the power in the hands of big companies, of governments that do not respect this. So for me, democracy is a form of communication, influenced by Dewey there. It's about living together, about a form of life. So it's not just enough to point to certain figures that are more authoritarian. One can do that, but it's the more deeper analysis should be about what kind of life can we have together in the current circumstances, and how can we support this common life, so that it's not just about the politicians, but also about what are we gonna do, how are we gonna be together. I think this would be really helpful to create this different form of politics, and in the current world we need more global cooperation for this, and in that sense it's the intercultural work, including work that can be helped by translation, is very important. And recently I have put more emphasis on this cultural aspect. For example, I also a paper on Ubuntu robot from African views, and I also wrote about Asian views. And in this book, Artificial Religion, I write about how Western religion still influence thinking about AI in the Western technological imagination. Why? Because every culture will have its influence on their thinking about AI. And so if we want some global thinking about AI, then we also need to have this intercultural dialogue. And that includes all kinds of cultural and religious perspectives. So AI governance at a global level that works can only be on the basis of respecting the diversity of cultural values, so not only the cultures and the values of Silicon Valley, for example, which we today have, and we need a willingness for mutual learning. So common good can only be found out through this process, and one has a tradition in, luckily, traditions in peacemaking, traditions in interfaith dialogue, for example. I just mentioned one name here globally, and so one can build on this experience of intercultural dialogue also in the area of AI. For my part, I try to contribute that also as member of the Independent International Scientific Panel on AI for United Nations, where we discuss issues such as the continuing change of AI and how to respond to that. It's going very fast. The concentration of power that we have, the lack of linguistic diversity. English is very dominant in the world. And AI further promotes that. How can we deal with that? The erosion of shared reality I spoke about, authoritarianism, something at the UN, I just come from Geneva, that is very much in the interest of the member states now is children's rights. Used to be less prominent, but now children's rights get more attention. at these summits. Mental health issues also important, where AI can contribute to this, and the fragmentation of governance instruments. So we still need to work on global governance, how to make it happen, how to make it happen in a way that doesn't destroy diversity, that takes into account diversity, cultural diversity also, at the same time that is able to also exercise some power and, for example, rein in some of the current big powers. So this is a huge challenge politically, of course, but I think the only way, because AI is some global force, it doesn't know borders, and if we don't have some good framework for global cooperation and global governance of AI, and one that respects the diversity of the cultures we have on our globe, then we have the current problems. So I hope that in this talk that I've given some overview of some problems and potential solutions, where I would like to stress this importance of working towards common good, relational approaches in various cultures, and the need for intercultural and global governance of AI in a global context. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this really interesting presentation and this clear outline also for people who are probably not working in the field of AI, political philosophy, ethical questions. Thank you very much. That was very interesting overview of your really valuable work. And we've seen on the slides some of Professor Coeckelbergh's books. One book by Polity Press, co-authored with Professor David Kunkel, who is now our second speaker. He's based in Northern Illinois in the United States, and he will join us online and give an online presentation.
I begin with an act of plagiarism, as my talk today reappropriates and redeploys a question that Czech-Brazilian media theorist Vilém Flusser once used for a book he published in 1987. At the time Flusser was writing, the dominance of the written word seemed to be in crisis, as new modes of digital expression seemed to herald the end of writing and the beginning of a post-literate age. I rewrite Flusser's question 35 years later, because it again looks as if writing's future is in question and on the line. This time due to impressive developments in large language models and other forms of generative artificial intelligence. It is in the face of these 21st century innovations that we now find ourselves once again asking seemingly apocalyptic questions about writing and its future. Thus, it seems prudent to once again reissue Flusser's titular question, does writing have a future? And we can, following Flusser's example, begin with a very direct statement. What large language models signify is not the end of writing, but the terminal limits of a particular conceptualization of writing that has been called logocentrism. In other words, writing indeed has a future, but only if we reconceptualize how we think about writing and write about thinking. So here's my plan of attack. I will begin by briefly characterizing three defining characteristics of logocentric metaphysics. In part 2, I will then investigate how large language models disrupt logocentrism by releasing a deconstruction of its organizing principles. Finally, part 3 then will formulate the terms and conditions of an alternative way to think and write about large language models and generative AI that escape the conceptual grasp of logocentrism and its hegemony. One of the main complaints or criticisms directed against large language models, like OpenAI's ChatGPT or Anthropic's Claude, is that these technologies generate seemingly intelligible statements, but do not and cannot understand what it is they are saying. Versions of this have proliferated in both the academic and popular media. Consider the following explanation offered by Ian Bogost in an op-ed for The Atlantic. ChatGPT, he writes, lacks the ability to truly understand the complexity of human language and conversation. It is simply trained to generate words based on a given input, but it does not have the ability to truly comprehend the meaning behind those words. Or a similar statement from the linguist Emily Bender in a profile published in New York Magazine. The models are built on statistics. They're great at mimicry and bad at facts. Why? Large language models have no access to real-world embodied reference. If the terms of these critical reappraisals sound familiar, they should. It's just good old-fashioned logocentric metaphysics. Now, logocentrism is a term that was originally coined by the German philosopher Ludwig Klages in the early 1900s. It refers to the tradition in Western science and philosophy that regards words and language as fundamental expressions of an external reality. We don't have time for a deep dive into the history and consequences of this influential way of thinking. Instead, I will just note 3 characteristics that are already in play and operationalized by the current conversations and debates regarding large language models. First, there is a hierarchy of words and things, and that hierarchy is initially arranged and organized by Aristotle in De Interpretatione. And Aristotle writes this: spoken words are the symbols of mental experience, and written words are the symbols of spoken words. Just as all men have not the same writing, so all men have not the same speech sounds. But the mental experiences, which these directly symbolize, are the same for all, as also are those things of which our experiences are the images. Thus, there are things which by way of our senses produce images in the mind. These are then represented by spoken words, which are subsequently represented by written signs. And if you're thinking to yourself, well, yeah, that's just obvious. That thought is itself evidence of the extent to which logocentrism is the basic operating system of our usual ways of thinking. Second, writing is a technology. Unlike speech, which is considered to be a natural and inherent capability of the human species and a direct symbol of thought, writing is artificial, external, and technical. As Walter Ong explained in the book Orality and Literacy, writing, and especially alphabetic writing, is a technology, calling for the use of tools and other equipment. By contrast with natural oral speech, writing is completely artificial. And it is for this reason that writing is already situated as a form of artificial intelligence. As Plato has Socrates say in the Phaedrus, and so it is with written words. You might think they spoke as if they had intelligence, but if you question them, wishing to know about their sayings, they always say only one and the same thing. Third, writing is useful only to the extent that it is an instrument of expression. As a secondary and derived representation of speech, what matters most with writing is what its progenitor intended to say. Derrida explains it this way: if for Aristotle, spoken words are the symbols of mental experience, and written words are the symbols of spoken words, it is because the voice, producer of the first symbols, has a relationship of essential and immediate proximity with the mind. Producer of the first signifier, it is not just a simple signifier among others. It signifies mental experiences, which themselves reflect or mirror things by natural resemblance. And if we ask the question, what is it Derrida is trying to say here? That very question, a mode of inquiry which seeks to discover what an author is saying in by the instrumentality of the writing, that is logocentrism par excellence. So the fundamental challenge or the opportunity with large language models and generative AI systems like OpenAI's ChatGPT or Anthropic's Claude, Google's Gemini, you name it, is that these algorithms write without speaking, without having access to the logos, and without an embodied living voice. In response to this seemingly monstrous problem, contemporary critiques like those offered by Bogost, Bender, and many others, proceed from and reassert the truth of logocentric metaphysics with little or no critical hesitation. These algorithms, they argue, might be able to arrange words in seemingly intelligible orders, but they do not know what it is they are saying. Consequently, the problem is not that logocentrism has somehow failed to work in the face of these new technologies of writing. It's quite the opposite. The problem is that logocentrism works all too well, exerting its influence over our thinking about writing and writing about thinking in ways that go by largely without notice. What makes large language models so important and interesting is that they disrupt this way of thinking, and they do so in at least 3 ways. First, large language models undermine the very notions of authority, authorship, and accountability. When confronted with any written document, one of the first questions we ask is who wrote it, and who can therefore be responsible for what has been written. Responses to these questions have typically been resolved by identifying the author, who it is commonly assumed speaks to us through the instrumentality of the text. But, as Michel Foucault explained in the aptly titled essay, What is an Author? This concept is not some naturally occurring phenomenon. It was a literary and legal affordance deliberately fabricated at a particular time and place in an effort to determine and decide who is speaking. The author, as Roland Barthes explained, is a modern figure, a product of our society insofar as emerging from the Middle Ages with English empiricism, French rationalism, and the personal faith of the Reformation, it discovered the prestige of the individual, of, as it is more nobly put, the human person. Prior to this modern and distinctly European innovation, Barthes contends, there were perhaps writers or generators of text, but no authors, as we currently understand that term. And like many theorists of his time, such as Marcel Mauss, Claude Lévi-Strauss, Barthes also employs the critical foil provided by 20th century anthropological discoveries. In ethnographic societies, he writes, the responsibility for a narrative is never assumed by a person, but by a mediator, shaman, or relator, whose performance, the mastery of the narrative code, may possibly be admired, but never his genius. Outside of the experiences and traditions of European modernism, narratives have been successfully developed, performed, and accumulated without necessarily needing what is called the author. But if the author, as the principal figure of literary authority and accountability, comes into existence at a particular place and at a specific moment in time, there is also a point at which it would cease to fulfill this role. It is this disappearance and withdrawal of what had been the principal figure of literary authority that is announced and marked by Barthes' seemingly apocalyptic title, Death of the Author. What this phrase indicates is not the end of life of any particular individual or the end of human writing, but the terminal limits of the figure of the author as the authorizing agent and guarantee of what is said in and by writing. But Barthes and Foucault obviously did not address themselves to large language models. Their work on the author function anticipates our current situation with algorithmically generated content. What we now have with large language models are writings without the underlying intentions of some embodied living voice to animate an answer for what comes to be written. Consequently, such writings are quite literally unauthorized. But instead of this being a criticism concerning what these AI-generated texts lack, it shows us the extent to which the authority for writing, any writing, whether human or machine, has always and already been a socially constructed artifice. Thus, as Bernard Stiegler writes, this is the kind of unauthorization where we have an authority without an author, and it inheres in all forms of writing as techniques. Second, this affects the means of meaning. Once the text is cut loose from the controlling interests and intentions of an author, the question concerning significance gets turned around. Specifically, the meaning of a piece of writing is not something that can be guaranteed a priori by the authentic character or ethos of the one who is assumed to be speaking through the medium of the text. Instead, meaning transpires in and from the process of reading and interpreting. And if it is the case that this significance had been customarily attributed to an author, that attribution is, and has always actually and only been, projected backwards from the reader onto a supposed and oftentimes absent author. Meaning making, in other words, is an effect of reading that is then retroactively presupposited to become its own presumed cause. This flipping of the script on modern literary theory changes the location of meaning making from the original intentions of the author or the writer who has something to say to the interpretive activity of the reader who makes meaning in or generates it out of the materiality of the written content. As Bart explains, text is made of multiple writings drawn from many cultures and entering into mutual relations of dialogue, parody, contestation. But there is one place where this multiplicity is focused, and that place is the reader. A text's unity lies not in its origin, but in its destination. Thus, the meaning of a text, whether it is written by a human author, generated by a large language model, or assembled from the productive interaction and collaboration of both, is situated in the interpreting and meaning making that is produced in and by reading. Logocentric literary theory actually has had things backwards and upside down. This also explains how AI-generated content comes to have meaning. The critics are correct when they point out, for instance, that ChatGPT lacks the ability to truly understand the complexity of human language and conversation. But it would be impetuous for us to conclude from this fact that what the AI generates is nonsense, meaningless, or bullshit. These writings are meaningful, and what they mean is something that happens in the process of our reading, interpretation, and evaluation of the generated content. And this fact is not something that is specific to large language models, but it is, as Bart points out originally, a defining characteristic of all writing. Finally, the issue is not where meaning is located and produced. What is at issue is the concept of meaning itself. Beginning with Aristotle, and persisting in the current critique of AI technology, language has been assumed to consist of signs that refer and defer to a signified. When we write the words large language model, for instance, it is assumed that those linguistic tokens stand for and refer to some real thing out there in the world, like the ChatGPT application developed by OpenAI. The signification sign, Derrida explains, has always been understood and determined in its meaning as sign of, a signifier referring to a signified, a signifier different from its signified. Therefore, words have meaning because someone, like an author, who we assume is an embodied human person with access to the real world outside language, uses words to refer to and say something about things. And the big problem with large language models is they simply lack this ability. They manipulate words and linguistic tokens without knowing or caring what these signs refer to. But the seemingly common sense view of how language works is not necessarily the natural order of things, and it has been directly challenged by 20th century innovations in structural linguistics, which sees language and meaning making as a matter of difference, situated within the materiality of language itself. Signs, therefore, do not, at least not principally and or exclusively, come to have meaning by direct reference to things that exist outside the system of signs. Signs refer to and differ from other signs. And it's the dictionary that provides what is perhaps one of the best illustrations of this basic semiotic principle. In a dictionary, words come to have meaning through their differential relationship to other words. In pursuing the meaning of words in the dictionary, one remains within the system of linguistic signifiers and never gets outside language to the referent, or what is typically called the transcendental signified. This is the meaning, or at least one of the meanings, of that famous statement that is so often associated with Derrida: there is nothing outside the text. And this is especially true for large language models, as there is quite literally nothing outside the texts on which they have been trained, and that they in turn generate from the input of a user prompt. We could therefore say, by way of remixing Wittgenstein, that for these generative AI systems, the limits of their language model mean the limits of their world. Consequently, what has been offered as a criticism of large language model technology, namely that these algorithms only circulate different signs without access to the real world embodied reference, might not be the indictment critics think it is. Large language models are post-structuralist machines that deconstruct the defining conceptual oppositions of classical semiotics. Large language models are a significant challenge because what we now have with these technologies are things that write without speaking, a proliferation of texts that do not have nor are beholden to the authoritative voice of an author, and statements the truth of which cannot be anchored in and assured by a prior intention to say something. From one perspective, a perspective that remains bound to the epoch of logocentrism, this can only be seen as a threat and a crisis. What is on the line and in the crosshairs is our very understanding of language and the meaning of literature. The future of writing and human communication seems to be in jeopardy. But from another perspective, one which follows the deconstruction of this tradition that had been developed and documented in 20th century literary theory, this is an opportunity to think beyond and in excess of the limitations of Western metaphysics and its hegemony. Understood in this way, large language models and generative AI do not threaten writing, the figure of the author, or the concept of truth. They only threaten a particular and limited conceptualization, one that is itself not some naturally occurring phenomenon, but the product of a particular culture and philosophical tradition. Consequently, instead of being misunderstood as signs of the apocalypse or the end of writing, large language models and generative AI reveal the limits of the logocentric privilege, participate in a deconstruction of its organizing principles, and open the opportunity to think and to write differently. In the end, the future of writing depends on how we understand and theorize what is meant by the word writing. If we understand and take it literally, that is, as the process of arranging words or linguistic tokens in linear sequence on some tangible medium, then writing will indeed continue well into the future. But who or what does that writing, and how that affects the meaning of any particular piece of written content, is a question that is and has actually always been in flux and dynamic. Large language models simply render all of this legible.
Yeah, thank you very much for this presentation, which touched on a very, very important subject, the question of the future of writing. And I remember when ChatGPT, I don't know when it was, a few years ago, when it was launched, I was teaching at an American university, and all the students started it. I mean, at that time it was very easy to detect that it was ChatGPT. That they used ChatGPT to use their final essays, to write their final essays. But there were no guidelines from the university how to deal with it at the time. And the main guideline was don't give them essays to write anymore, only exams. So I touched on exactly this subject, the end of writing. Professor Coeckelbergh is online with us, I think. Is he now? So we have the opportunity now to do the first round of questions, short round, if there are any questions for him, since he's online today, and also to our first speaker, if you have any questions to him, to Mr. Professor Coeckelbergh. Anyone want to break the ice?
Thank you very much, Professor. Thank you for your speaks. And I have a question about your lecture. What's your perspective about the future? We can optimistic about the future if we think the main share in writing transfer to innovation. For example, one researcher for writing an article, maybe the 70% of his or her energy focus on the writing, but in the future, in this situation, maybe 90% of his or her energy focus on innovating. In your perspective, this is possible or not? Thank you for your answer.
Yeah, thank you. It's a good question, and I think we have to put it in historical context. The task of writing has, over time, increasingly been augmented by all kinds of other technological capabilities and improvements. So at one point, you think in the Middle Ages, in order for a book to be widely distributed, you needed an army of monks in Europe copying handwritten manuscripts using a quill and writing it out on parchment, and then what is called a codex, right? And then came the printing press with Gutenberg, at least in Western Europe, and that automated the way in which the manufacture of printed content became available and widely available in the late medieval period, early Renaissance. Then you get to things like the typewriter. Famously, Martin Heidegger was very critical of Nietzsche because Nietzsche used a typewriter and he didn't write by hand, which is the way that Heidegger thought you should write. But the typewriter automated for Nietzsche and others that came after him a lot of the writing process. And then in the 20th century, we get PCs and other computational systems that have word processing power, and we're able to, really increase our productivity in writing with word processing. Then comes the internet, which is increasing the ability to do research and to cut and paste things and comment on them. And now we have large language models, which are automating even more of the writing process. So I don't see this as being a difference in kind, but an evolution in the way in which writing technology is enabling researchers, writers, developers, artists to be more productive in the task of writing. It's not going to change the fact that we still are writers. It's not going to change the fact that we are the researchers, we are the innovators, but it is going to change a lot of the way in which the text is produced. And that will also inevitably change the way the text is consumed.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for the very interesting lecture. I want to ask Professor Coeckelbergh.
Just a second.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm getting echo.
Yeah. I have a question to Professor Coeckelbergh. He said AI is influenced by Western thinking, includes Western religions, myths and other religious narratives still shape the Western technological imagination. How is it not influenced by, let's say, Islamic thinking or Confucian thinking? What brings you to this kind of conclusive statement?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Maybe it's helpful to give an example there. So in the Christian thinking that influences a lot of what's happening in Silicon Valley, there's a lot of apocalyptic thinking, for example. And this is transferred to the way they think about technology, that technology is going to that AI is becoming super intelligent in the future, and that we move to a point when everything will be different after that. So this is just an example of how some element in Christian thinking influences. And it would be interesting to explore from other traditions how ideas from other religions could also shape thinking of AI. And could help to have a more alternative or more diverse AI narratives and visions for the future.
Yeah, we have one more. You have two questions.
Do you think that AI could replace medical professionals because it already replaces a lot of jobs, and which jobs are not replaced by AI?
Who wants to answer? Or both of you? Professor Coeckelbergh, did you hear the question?
I didn't hear the question, I'm sorry.
Can you repeat, please?
Okay. Did you think that AI could replace medical professionals because it already replaces a lot of jobs, and which jobs are not replaced by AI?
Oh yeah, this is a really interesting question. My sister is a dermatologist, and so my family talks a lot about AI's impact in medicine. I don't think the right question is replacement. I think it's about reorientation and reallocation of skilled labor in medicine and medical practice. So, for example, my sister spends her time doing skin cancer, and part of what she does is diagnose lesions on the skin to see if they're cancerous. She knows now that this thing does a better job of diagnosing lesions as being cancerous or not, because he trained on all the images we've collected on skin cancer over the past, and is therefore more accurate than her own eyes at diagnosing the skin cancer. But it's not going to do the surgery. She might use robotic-assisted surgery, but she's still going to be doing the surgery. So she's going to get out of one part of the business, which is diagnosis, and spending more time on treatment. Another place where people worry about replacement is in the area of care. Nurses assistants, the people who supply the real hands-on involvement with patients in hospitals and nursing homes and other centers of offering services. There's really no way AI can do the caring. And even though the surgeon might be assisted by robotic means, the nurses inevitably are going to be the ones that have the first contact with patients. So what might actually happen is that there will be a greater need for human care services in medicine, and that we can shift some of our resources in the direction of supplying that service, which is something very uniquely human that the AI will never be able to accomplish.
Yeah, my answer was going in the same direction, so I think it's not necessarily a question of replacement, but about how AI and humans can work together in a good way. And I think to take up the example there, I think that there is of course a danger that humans rely too much on the AI and do not use their own judgment anymore. So this can be a danger. I think in each particular context, one has to see, like, is the AI better than a human or not? And we need to have a judgment in the end whether which false positives, false negatives, and so on are acceptable. And I think so. I think it is a very complex kind of question in the sense that we have to look in specific practices. And people are, as we speak, are learning still in these practices. What works, what doesn't work, what could be good ways of using the AI. And there is, although there is no replacement generally, there is a danger that, in principle, I agree very much with David that, of course, it would be great if we then, as professionals, have more time to do our thing, our creative thing, or our judgment, or our professional work. But what sometimes happens with automation technologies is that they are used in such a way that, in this case, medical professionals get less time. For example, nurses get less time with patients because there is digital technology, there is AI. So all depends also of how this technology is embedded in kind of the way that things are organized and managed. So we should not only look at the technology itself, but also at a wider context, in this case, also the management context in healthcare.
Thank you very much. two more questions. Considering the time, we will have more time to discuss after the last speaker, and then of course after the symposium as well. But I would suggest that the two questions we take together and then answer them also together. So, Sadiq, Armenian, sorry, wait for the microphone because particularly Professor Coeckelbergh won't hear you otherwise.
Yeah, first of all, thanks for the interesting presentation, and I want to return once again to writing in AI. So writing is the result of a mental process, and by using AI, we are delegating, we are outsourcing this activity now to artificial intelligence. And like just you explained, the question is how in the long term, or how in the long run, this would influence us as the researchers. Are we becoming less intelligent ourselves by giving our thinking ability or analytical ability to machines? And if it is the case, how we should try to avoid that, to not let AI in the long term to make humans less intelligent themselves.
Thank you.
Thank you for the professors. My name is Zaina, and as a medical professional myself, I'm very interested to the medical AI, this topic especially. And since last year, I was also in the US, and I saw some of the medical professionals, especially the doctors or physician assistants, or most of them are using, if you ever heard about Heidi, this is an AI to help to help them to take notes, in their let's say medical records. Of course, as an AI or as a technology, they are not only summarizing, but they're also listening to our conversations as medical professionals between us and the patients. And of course, they're also recording the private sections of the conversations. On one hand, I agree with you that this cannot replace our role as medical professionals, but this will help, or like to some extent, it will ease our job, let's say to shorten the course of the examinations. But I don't know, I mean, I don't have this kind of extensive understanding regarding to what extent the regulations of the medical AI usage in the US, I mean, in the privacy area or the law itself. I mean, I agree with you that before you also mentioned about the dermatologists that they are smart enough to diagnose this skin cancer. But on the other hand, I also realized that some other technologies that, for instance, to record how much the calories that have been burned while we are doing the physical activity, some of them are let's say not pretty much accurate because it's not literal calories that we are burned. But I want to ask that how do you see on your perspective regarding the privacy areas itself, and to how far we can utilize this in our daily job as medical professionals? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Who wants to start?
Let's go backwards. I'll take the last question first, if that's okay. The example of note-taking, I think, is really a good illustration here. When doctors are visiting with patients, they inevitably have to take copious notes to keep the records of the patient up to date and make sure that everything is recorded accurately. And so a number of medical practices have been using the transcription capabilities of the recent AI in order to do a lot of this note-taking for them and relieve them of the task of taking notes. And on the one hand, this is a very good thing because the doctor then can focus on treatment and on diagnosis and everything else that the doctor is supposed to do, and the note-taking is done by the AI. The difficulty that we're facing at this point in time is exactly what you pointed out. Most of these large language models are publicly available systems that are not really locked down in terms of privacy. And we can't, if we're using just the publicly available ChatGPT, have any control over privacy in those circumstances. So doctors and hospitals that want to use these tools inevitably have to have proprietary systems where they are able to control for privacy. In the US, we have a HIPAA law, and the HIPAA law is really a very strict law having to do with patient privacy and confidentiality between patient and doctor. And the currently publicly available systems don't meet these standards. So one of the things that is a real challenge for using AI in medical practice currently is how to take the tool that is available and very powerful and make it compliant with current regulations that are put in place for medical privacy. And there's no easy answer to this, but inevitably it's going to cost money because someone is going to have to pay for a proprietary system that is developed in conjunction with OpenAI, Google, or somebody else.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would like to answer to the question about intelligence, which is of course a very important one. This depends very much of how the technology is used, right? So if someone just does one prompt, for example, write an essay on intelligence and AI, and then takes whatever comes out of that and submits it, for example, as a student, then that person hasn't thought through the question. The person won't, doesn't use this in an intelligent way. But I think there are ways to use this technology in more intelligent ways, where you spend a lot of thinking about how to prompt, when you iteratively always go back and work on a text, do new prompts and so on. So I think that there is a danger that people rely too much on technology, as with all automation technologies, and this then would infect their intelligence, their skills of composing a text, but also the skill of thinking. But I think that there are ways to do it in a more intelligent ways, and I think both as researchers and as teachers, we have to work on how to teach people to use it, to use this technology better. So that's my answer to that. I don't know what David wants.
I think what Mark just said is spot on. I would just add one little historical note. Every technology of writing, since the invention of writing, has made us worry about human de-skilling. That is outsourcing our intelligence to machines. If you go back to Plato's Phaedrus, Socrates is worried about this new innovation that comes from Egypt called writing, and that it is going to cause the erosion of human intelligence because we will rely on writing and not exercise our memories. And so we see this replay with every single innovation in the technology of writing since the advent of writing. Now that doesn't mean we should be complacent, but at least should give us some confidence that we will figure this out in the way that Mark described.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that. Considering the time, let's move on to our next three presentations. And our next speaker is Professor Amir Hor. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Start again.
Hello? Okay.
Yeah, thanks for having me. My name is Amir. I'm a senior scientist and I'm not a philosopher, just to be clear. I'm a sort of engineer, scientist, and a type of a data scientist for probably the last 20-30 years. So what I'm going to talk about here is not from a perspective of philosophy or basic stuff. Is more about the technology, science, the way it's developed now and the future, which I think, obviously we heard a lot today about the risks of AI in type of societies and governance. And there's obviously a risk and talks on the technology side and science as well. In the type of all this discussion of replacement and assistance, what we should choose, and how the way the innovations and inventions are supposed to be carried out if the AI gets replaced, but would replace the human type of a role in these areas. Okay, so let's start. I suppose we talked. There was a lot of talk about this types of and the concepts of intelligence, or versus knowledge, all the human type experiences in the human history, where was a raw type of data which gets refined and becomes knowledge, and then there is an archiving type system which develops in terms of writings and preserving orally, and then it just flows into the type of a human history to get to the next generation, and now we get to us here now. So there's a lot of aspects of the developments of science and technology in terms of observation, learning, understanding, reasoning, and things, which end up obviously a lot of our technological advancement throughout the history. And that's been the basic definitions that we observe, we learn, we type of try to reason and then have understanding, and then based on that we would design and go further with enhancements. So these type of basic concepts been on the human history for a long time. What I'm going to talk today, obviously, a little bit from our perspective in terms of technology and the science in domain-based thinking we have some definitions in technology called domain, and we have multi-domain systems and multimodal system, which I'm going to go through a little bit and give a relation to the AI and what is essentially comes out of the these type of concepts when the AI involves in this. So as a technology and science guy, we would think that obviously the human brain and things are multimodal, multi-domain type of realities. And this means that we have somehow, we can probably divide it into soft part and hard part, reasoning and compassion, all this type of different aspects of a human soul. We can bring it down, when you bring it down into science and technology and the type of mathematics, you defining a domain and a modal type realities for this. And so the code I just put the code definition from let's say, very famous one from you can get it from the internet, how human knowledge progression is cumulative, adaptive, and interdisciplinary evolution of understanding. So this has been wrong, and obviously there's a different aspects to this. There's a historic based knowledge progression, which was a type of we call it a dynamic domain, because that domain essentially dynamically moved and bring us today. And there's a human societal interaction which we learn from each other through wars and a lot of events in the history. And there's a basis of knowledge based on a sort of availability of the materials, energy, machines and things, which is all coming into a type of historical base of the knowledge and technologies. So obviously it's been very famous that they said that nature is the first our first teacher. So we learn a lot about stuff from nature, and then develop a type of data pattern and data understanding of what is really going on in terms of rules, and then we try to put it into a maths and physics law, and try to understand and enhance this sort of rules and laws throughout the history. I'm not going through all of these details today because there's only 20 minutes though. But the evolution of human knowledge is, well, it's really going through some steps, which we see it starts from some basic stuff, developing, going through the what we call the archiving through domains, mathematical domains, and physical domains, and then there's a cognitive understanding of that type of reality outside for us after the archiving. So, in terms of gaining through exposures, and the history, I said that we would have probably dividing it from learning through the history, through the exposures. Humans obviously learned a lot from interacting with each other through the hostilities, through the type of migrations and other stuff. And that's really accumulated the whole knowledge. And obviously the availability of resources are quite important to sort of this accumulation of the knowledge. But what I wanted to talk today is, which is related to what the previous speakers in the discussion today was going on. I'm going to raise a question here, as we are more engaging with AI in all aspects of life, including technological and scientific progression. What is the main role of AI, and is it progressive or dampening in terms of long term? What it means that, well, you see all our students and things coming out of universities in probably the last 200-300 years, when we have the classical type universities and things, and now we see that the AI getting type of more into the educational system, understanding the activities of the students. Is it going to help them in long term? And is it going to help the whole society in terms of science, technology, to rely a lot on AI and replace a lot of the aspects which we've been sort of manual, and students were sort of going through the mental activities. As I said, we define human brain as a multi-type of domain, a multi-modal. So these activities going on, I remember about 20 years ago, 25 years ago, I was working in a group, and there was this professor that he was telling me that I managed to put the reality of a geometry of things into a mathematical expressions. And that was my interpretation from a type of reality outside into a type of a domain of mathematics, which you can write expressions, and then that would represent the whole geometry. So change one of these parameters and you get different geometry. So that type of moving from a reality of into this type of archive or type of developing through these domains, that was a type of brain activity on those days. Can AI do the same things here? Can AI generate a new domain where some of the realities would be sort of written down or archived through some type of expressions and things? Well, if you look at the AI structure today, like LLMs and large language models, which we talked about this today, there was a lot of talk. There is obviously an aspect that is the mathematical domain. It works. We just vectorize the things. We would train over these vectors, and we train that essentially doesn't mean any reality for the AI. This is just a mathematical process in some domains. It's like writing a geometry in mathematical expressions. So that's why the AI doesn't understand what is it saying or what is really advising. It's just the working in terms of in some type of a mathematical domain and trying to come up with all this type of a categorization and relations between the objects they have. So obviously in physics, in mathematics and science is very famous. You move between spaces in the mathematics, like if you are a scientist, if you see the scientist things, if you have some data in the time as a time series, it depends on the time. If you move it into and transform it into the, say, frequency domain, which is very famous for the scientists, you will get completely different type of interpretation, different understanding of a data, different insight of a data. And that's moving between this type of mathematical space or mathematical domains. That's the basic stuff that this AI is now doing today. So it's just moves the data, try to disentangle or project things through this moving and transforming through the domains, mathematical domains. So in a sense, AI has no type of a basis for any cognitive understanding of what these patterns in original or transform means. It's just trying to make sense out of this data, out of these mathematical operations and moving through in between the mathematical domains. So if you really go and type of replace that type of activities with a type of a brain of human activities without really human in the loop, you would end up having a very limited type and dampening type situation in long term. It means that we would be getting obviously much faster results, better options, faster computations, but in terms of moving out of these domains, there is no possibility AI can jump out of this domain like a human brain and generate something new in terms of outside these domains it works. Because it's always constrained and the boundaries for the AI is constrained with these domains. It works as a mathematical domains. So that's really a frightening things, because if you really leave it to AI, although you might have a much better, faster computation, all these aspects, which is assistance to a human progression, but it would sort of close down and bring down and narrow down the whole innovations in terms of science and technology. So I just type of put the table here to see a risk involved in the activities of AI, and in terms of what activities might be benefits and what activities might really dampen or retard through the excessive use of AI or replacement of AI with it. So there's obviously different type of, and the people are now talking about this risk, how much risk we carry on the different activities in terms of social governance. But in social and in science and technology, the real risk is a retardation of the human brain. What we see essentially is if our real kids getting rely on AI from early ages, especially the universities, when they try to understand things, through the AI eyes, that would limit their essentially understanding of the science and technology to the AI limited domains. So we would not really have a very major thinkers and major breakthroughs through the science and things. We would just might be better, faster in terms of developments. Okay. So the question number 2, which I wanted to raise today, is what's the balance between this commissioning of AI with the human system? So how much AI, how much type of human brains and activities and things we need to balance out to really get to some type of a progression and acceleration in terms of progression. We know that AI is beneficial in some aspects. So we have a much fast, because it has much bigger archive in his hand, so he can go through a lot of stuff much faster than the brain. He has access obviously to a lot of, and he can really, the computational power, it will be much faster in computing, reasoning and things. But in terms of really going through the technological advancement, it's just not enough to be faster and more type of having more material. It's just an innovation side which comes from the human capabilities, human brain capabilities, which is missing. And that needs to be really looked at, how we make this balance between the AI assistance and AI replacement. That's a major questions which we obviously will discuss in the different aspects today. So, in terms of obviously technology, we know that in manufacturing going through the very, very big steps in digitalization state. There is a Industry 4, 5 program, Industry 6 even. We have an Internet of Things, IoT, a lot of aspects. But this in type of advancements, there's always a type of talk of a human in the loop. So can you leave the AI to be completely autonomous, or do all the automation autonomous even in manufacturing? The experiences and obviously the projection of these experiences means that if you're leaving the human in the loop out, and you're not really commissioning any human in between, there's always a danger of somewhere diverting. I mean, they're pointing out a couple of type of risks, but one of them is really diverging from some point, and because of AI, it doesn't have that understanding of outside world, this diversion might end up somewhere very, very catastrophic. So this type of assistance versus the replacement argument is always it's a very, very live type of discussions in this developments of manufacturing. So as I really just said, the autonomy type side of AI is really becomes very, very vital. The security issue with the IoT and things also another aspects which we will discuss today. But the take is obviously here is you use it AI as a tool, not just as a replacement of the human. But this tool obviously might affect it hugely because of its capabilities, but there's a limitation and boundaries for it. So conclusion, obviously the evolving role of AI from assistant to replacement in some aspects is creating the risk. That's in the science of technology, that's really obvious. So can AI act as bridge to the entirely new cross-domain separate fields like art, engineering? So can AI get into the artistic and can you write something? Somebody can bring the artistic things into the mathematical domain and put it into AI. That's something which is discussed, and to some limit it would be really might be feasible. But as I said, this type of activities are limited by the boundaries of maths, and that boundary would not really be very innovative in long term. So systematic risk and vulnerabilities, I discussed the misalignment, wrong decision making, pitfalls over reliance, no human in the loop, and golden rules for commissioning, preserve multimodal balance, demands transparency and explainability. That's the things which really needs to be very fairly observed before really AI commissioned in any type of technological basis. Thanks for the listening. Thanks for having me today.
Thank you very much for this presentation. We have time for questions afterwards because we are running out of time. So let's move on to our next presentation by Dr. Coeckelbergh Eslami. Once again, he joins us online, and the presentation will be online. And Dr. While we're waiting for the presentation, Dr. Coeckelbergh Eslami is the translator of one of Professor Coeckelbergh's books into Persian in Iran.
Hello everyone. Professor Mark Coeckelbergh, distinguished college, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. It is a great honor to participate in this international symposium on artificial intelligence, ethics and democracy. I would like to thank Dr. Reza Gholami for his kind invitation and the Iranian Wisdom House in Vienna for organizing this important academic event. My name is Ruhollah Islami, Associate Professor, Political Science at Federal University of Mashhad, Iran. My research focuses on political philosophy of public policy and the relationship between the technology and government. It has been a privilege to translate Professor Mark Coeckelberg's book AI and Democracy into Persian. Throughout his work, I became familiar with a philosophy who combined classic philosophy thought with the contemporary debates on AI. His preferred to the Persian edition described the translation as a bridge between intellectual tradition and expressed confidence in the contribution to Persian-speaking scholars to global discussion of AI ethics. Today, I would like to discuss Professor Coeckelberg's place in the political philosophy of AI and explain why his work is increasingly important for democratic society. Three political approach. One of my presentation is about three political approach to artificial intelligence. Contemporary debate on artificial intelligence can be understood through three broad political approach. The first is the market-oriented liberal approach. Here AI is viewed primarily is derived from innovation, economic growth, and scientific progress. Technology, company, and competitive market are seen as a main engine development. The perspective is closely related to the liberal tradition of John Locke and Friedrich Hayek, where technology innovations is expected to the strength, prosperity, and democratic society. The second of this approach is the state-centered approach. In the model, AI is primarily an instrument of government, security, and social coordination. Intelligence technology increases the capability of government to manage public administration, surveillance, and national security. Philosophy of perspective recall Thomas Hobbes' concept of sovereign state and contemporary analysis of power of Michel Foucault and Gilles Deleuze. Professor Mark Coeckelbergh representing in third approach, rather than asking how AI can maximum market or strong state power, he asked a more fundamental question. The question, Professor, is about how can AI remain compatible with democracy, human dignity, and ethical responsibility. His work belonging to the European tradition of normative political philosophy are inspired by thinkers such as Immanuel Kant and John Rawls, Karl Popper, and Hannah Arendt. He either celebrated technology and critically not reject it. Instead, he argued that innovation must always be guided and ethical value and democratic institutions. A political method for understanding AI. Another important contribution of the Professor Coeckelbergh is his methodology. AI cannot be understood through engineering alone. It requires dialogue between the philosophy of political science, law, ethics, sociology, and computer science. His work brings together different philosophy traditions. He recognized the importance of scientific progress represented by Francis Bacon and Auguste Comte. He learned from Michel Foucault and Gilles Deleuze that technology transforms power and institution. He also drew upon Hannah Arendt and Jürgen Habermas. Hannah Arendt about the totalitarian regime, and the regime used the information technology or AI to create a totalitarianism, and Jürgen Habermas described the public public sphere. To emphasize in public dialogue, democratic responsibility, and ethical judgment. Instead of following a single school of thought, Professor Coeckelbergh created dialogue among philosophical tradition. Reading his book is therefore like traveling through the history of political philosophy. In political philosophy of AI and artificial intelligence and democracy, classic thinkers from Plato and Aristotle and Rawls, Habermas and Foucault are brought into conversation with the ethical challenges of AI. The intellectual opening is one of the defining features of his scholarship. Democracy needs ethical care. The central question in Professor Coeckelberg's work is whether democracy can flourish in the age of AI. Democracy is more than election. In the founding of freedom, equality, political participation, representation, the role of law, civil society, and common good. Artificial intelligence creating new opportunity for democracy. It improves access to information, support digital participation, enhance public service, and enable evidence-based policy making. At the same time, it introduce serious risks. Algorithms may spread misinformation, reinforce political polarization, manipulate public opinion, and concentrate power in the hands of government or technology company, and all can a government or a state totalitarianism. Professor Coeckelbergh therefore argued that the democracy requires ethical care. AI should remain transparent, accountability, and subject to democracy oversight. Technology should strengthen public deliberation rather than replace it. Innovation should promote justice, inclusion, and common good. His message is clear. Artificial intelligence should remain accountability to humanity, not humanity to AI. Conclusion. Allow me to conclude with 3 observations. First, Professor Coeckelbergh philosophy is fundamentally defense of common good. It would evaluate AI not only by its efficiency but its contribution to justice, democracy, and human dignity. Second is scholarship combined critical reflection with practical policy recommendations, inspired by the critical insight of Michel Foucault and the democracy vision of Hannah Arendt. He emphasized dialogue, pluralism, transparency, accountability, civil responsibility, and peace. His work demonstrates how interdisciplinary research can connect philosophy with a public policy. 2. Like every influential thinker, his idea invite critical discussion. Scholars influenced by technological optimism may argue that ethic regulation should not slow innovation. Political realists, inspired by Nicolas Machiavelli or in the Persian tradition Nizamul Mulk, may argue that the technology development is driven primarily by power, security, geopolitical competition rather than moral principle. This perspective enrich the debate. Yet Professor Coeckelbergh reminds us that ethics should not prevent innovation, it should guide innovation. Technology explains what we can do. Political philosophy asks what we ought to do. In my view, it is Professor Coeckelbergh's most enduring contribution. He reminded us that the future of AI depended not only to more powerful algorithms, but also on wiser political institutions and a strong ethical commitment. Professor Coeckelbergh. On behalf of many scholars and students in Iran, I would like to thank you for your outstanding scholarship, your support for the Persian edition of your work, and your commitment to ethics, democracy, and humanity. We wish you continuing inspiration and many more influential books. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much for this presentation. We're now coming to the last few minutes. Unfortunately, as always, running out of time. So briefly for the last few minutes before we move on to the second part of the evening, to the presentation of our host, Professor Reza Gholami.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for your participating and contributing. It's a great honor to hold this gathering celebrating the publication of Professor Mark Coeckelbergh. Professor Mark Coeckelbergh's important books in Persian, especially his remarkable book, Artificial Intelligence and Democracy. Allow me first to express my sincere appreciation for Professor Coeckelbergh. He is not only one of the world's leading philosophers of technology, but also one of the few contemporary thinkers who consistently remind us that the most important questions about artificial intelligence are not merely technical. They are philosophical, ethical, and political. While many discussions about AI focus on innovation, efficiency, or economic growth, Professor Coeckelbergh invites us to ask deeper questions. What kind of society are we creating? What happens to human freedom when decisions are increasingly delegated to algorithms? What becomes of democracy when technological systems begin to shape public life? These are not questions about machines alone. They are questions about humanity itself. His book, Artificial Intelligence and Democracy, is therefore much more than a study of emerging technologies. It is an invitation to rethink democracy in the age of intelligence machines. By bringing together philosophy of technology, political philosophy, and ethics, the book demonstrates that the future of democracy depends not only on technological progress, but also on our collective moral and political choices. Inspired by this important work, I would like to talk about artificial intelligence and democracy and share you my questions and my problems, but unfortunately I don't have enough time and the time is over. And about challenges, as you know, we have many serious challenges about artificial intelligence and democracy. My colleague said about these challenges enough. AI may become a powerful dictator in the near future, and this is a big danger. But maybe the main question is what should be our response about the challenges? This is a really big question that we talk about this in the other session, other scientific meeting. I think and I believe that philosophy can save democracies. And this is my belief, of course. When I talk about philosophy, I think we should make it public and popularize philosophy. No, this philosophy, classic philosophy, or philosophy just educating in universities and so on. This is very important. And the second response maybe is that we need to revive the intellectual movement's authority. This is very important. We need intellectual movements and intellectual reference situation in our societies. This is very important. And the third answer to the challenges maybe is that the people around the world should have no doubt the necessity of regulating the work of AI. AI companies must be held fully accountable around the world. Some European countries around the world pursue these aims for AI companies in the United States, in other countries, and this is very important that we can create an organization or some very powerful laws for control and manage the AI companies around the world. I don't have enough time. I wrote my speech and I will publish my speech in Iranian Wisdom House for your critique and comments. Thank you again for your contributing and have a good evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I've seen a few hands who are up, but I suggest we continue this discussion and comments and questions in the next part, the more informal part of today's evening. As usual, those who come regularly to the events. Before we come to the
Danke, Dieter.
Also, Amir hatte Geburtstag. Und nun wünsche ich allen ein gutes Abendessen und eine gute Diskussion. And thank you for coming. Thank you.